The following computer simulation of a high-speed flight around the Los Angeles vicinity was produced to demonstrate a capability of scientific data visualization. This animation is part of the NASA-funded research being carried out at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. The entire animation was produced from one Landsat satellite image that was merged with digital elevation information. Landsat views the Earth from 570 miles up and is capable of seeing features that are approximately 30 meters square. A 30-meter square area is approximately the same size as the area inside the bases of a professional baseball field. This is Los Angeles, California on July 3rd, 1985. We are now traveling toward the Pacific Ocean at about 200,000 miles an hour and will drop down behind Santa Catalina Island about 26 miles off the coast of Los Angeles. We're going to fly through the isthmus of the island and then cross the coast north of the Santa Monica Mountains. As we head south, we can see features such as Marina del Rey and Los Angeles International Airport. We see the Palos Verdes Peninsula in the center now, along with the Long Beach Harbor. Now, we're moving down into the Orange County area. The bow tie-shaped feature now visible are Balboa and Lido Islands in Newport Bay. We're heading toward Los Angeles, and in the center of the screen is downtown. Hollywood and Beverly Hills are below as we move into the San Fernando Valley. You'll see a V-shaped lake appear. That's Castaic Lake. We will now turn and proceed to fly straight down the Rift Valley of the San Andreas Fault. We're crossing the east fork of the San Gabriel Mountains, and we'll turn around and face those same mountains when we lose elevation into the Pomona Valley area. We can see Mount Baldy at the top right of the screen, and as we pan the San Gabriel Mountains, we can note in the foreground the Santa Fe Dam and Recreation Area, the Santa Anita Racetrack and Golf Course. You can now see the Rose Bowl with the surrounding golf course. It took 5.5 days of non-stop computer time on a machine capable of computing 4 million instructions per second. Over 3,000 digital frames were generated to make L.A. the movie. That represents more than 2.6 billion bytes of data. That is equivalent to enough characters to fill 1.3 million pages of text. That would be a stack of paper over 44 stories tall. Techniques developed during the creation of L.A. the movie will be used to help scientists analyze the large quantities of data being sent back to Earth by satellites.
This tape demonstrates some physically based modeling techniques being developed at Caltech. Using these techniques, we model physical characteristics such as mass and momentum and calculate the motion under the influence of forces. Here's a technical sketch showing a red strut moving under the influence of forces, drawn as yellow vectors. Rubber band forces pull the first strut to the white dot or nail and connect the second strut to the first. We see how rubber band forces can be used to assemble compound objects. With external forces such as gravity, however, rubber band forces don't hold tightly. The struts pull apart. If we want to hold the struts in contact, we have to use a different technique to determine forces. In this sequence, we use our dynamic constraints technique to hold the objects together. This technique uses an inverse dynamics approach to calculate the constraint force needed to pull the strut to the white nail. The force continues to be applied, keeping the end point fixed to the nail as the strut spins. Turn off the constraint and the object goes flying off into space. We turn the constraint back on and the strut reconnects. Notice that the strut's end moves in a straight line to the nail. We now specify a point-to-point constraint connecting the second strut to the first. Notice that the first strut stays connected to the white nail. Notice also that the constraint forces continually adapt themselves as needed to maintain the constraints while the objects are moving. Here, we turn on the external gravity and damping forces, and the compound object stays held together. This sequence shows how we can build a model using constraints to specify how the pieces go together. We're building a tower. We use point-to-nail constraints to move the first three legs into place. We then use point-to-point constraints to connect the next three legs to the first three and continue building in this fashion. A buoyant force holds the legs upright during construction. To build this tower, we didn't have to specify positions or angles of the various components. We merely describe how we want the pieces to be connected, and the pieces move themselves into place. This sequence shows the self-assembly and motion of a chain. The links are connected using point-to-point constraints, and the ends affixed to the towers using point-to-nail constraints. The swinging motion of the chain arises naturally from the dynamics of the system. The motion is not programmed frame by frame. The computer calculates the motion based on the rules of physics. The chain soon comes to rest in a catenary shape under the influence of gravity and damping. Here we make a much more lively chain. We add springy forces between the links to get the energetic behavior. We also specify the timing for the links to jump up and attach themselves to the chain. Once we have set up the system, the details of the motion are calculated by the computer. This type of complex motion would be hard, if at all possible, to create using traditional kinematic, spline-based animation techniques. In this sequence, we show how dynamic constraints might be used in the assembly of space structures. The constraint forces we calculate are applied by rocket thrusters attached to the module. We align the module using orientation constraints, and we use a point-to-point constraint to move the module into place, performing the docking maneuver. Here we continue to assemble a modular space station. We describe how the pieces should connect, and the computer controls the rockets. Notice that several objects are moved into place simultaneously. Similar techniques could be used to control robots to be used in space. The tetrahedral space station design is based on the work of Oliver Harwood. We can model flexible objects as well. Here we see an elastic jello-like cube. We pick the cube up by its corner. Note the elastic stretching along the corner. As we release the cube, it falls to the table. Internal forces are calculated based on the deformation of the cube from its rest position. Dynamic constraints are used to keep the cube from penetrating the table. This final sequence suggests how dynamic constraints could be used for molecular modeling. We constrain the spheres to just touch each other. The spheres connect into a chain. We can connect the ends of the chain together, thus forming a ring. Repulsive forces between the spheres give the ring its circular shape. Or we can connect the opposing spheres, collapsing the ring. Connecting along the diagonals tightly packs the spheres.
Consider a typical region in the universe. Imagine that the matter in this region has small amplitude, long wavelength density fluctuations. In the computer, represent this matter as particles moving in a box under the force of gravity. As the model evolves, the attraction of gravity causes the dense regions to grow even denser. Particles come together under the force of gravity, forming a connected web-like structure of dense filaments and voids or nearly empty regions. These features, strings of dense clusters of galaxies and large empty regions, are similar to those found by observing the distribution of galaxies. This helps to confirm the model. A different choice of initial conditions, with particles randomly distributed, does not produce these connected structures.
You are about to view a computer simulation of rapid crack growth in a brittle metallic plate. Initially, there is a crack in the plate with a length of 24 millimeters. Step function loading is applied to the top and bottom surfaces, which sends stress waves into the crack. The crack then extends at 1 kilometer per second. The plot at the bottom represents the history of the stress intensity factor versus time. In the top view, two parameters are displayed at each point. Color represents strain energy density, which is correlated with stress, with dark blue representing low levels and red very high levels. The vertical position represents kinetic energy density, which is correlated with the velocity at every point. Note the singularities at the crack tips. In the next scene, we take a close-up view of the plate. The stress waves travel into the crack, and just before the crack begins to grow, we freeze time and zoom in on the crack tip region. Circular waves emitted from the crack tips form an interference pattern at the center of the plate.
This painting shows the basic features of a mature thunderstorm. As air rises in the updraft of the storm, it condenses to form rain. Being more dense than its surroundings, the rain-cooled air falls to the ground and spreads out in a shallow pool known as the thunderstorm outflow, shown at the bottom of the painting. In order to obtain high spatial resolution in our numerical model of the outflow, we confine our attention to the region enclosed by the red box, which corresponds to the model computational domain. Cold downdraft air from the storm travels from left to right inside the outflow and curves upward just behind the front, as shown here by the arrows. A Florida outflow is visible because it is carrying dirt aloft as shown in the photograph. Our model results will be compared to a laboratory density current, which is an intrusion of heavy, salty water into an expanse of light, fresh water. The salt water, colored white, is released and allowed to progress into a tank containing fresh water. Note the highly turbulent nature of the density current, particularly in the region at the left of the front nose of the denser solution. A vertical cross-section or side view through this flow reveals that small turbulent eddies form periodically at the upper portion of the front, then grow in size and eventually break down into turbulence. The numerical model has wind, temperature, and pressure data at points that are 100 meters apart. The domain is 40 kilometers wide and 10 kilometers tall. The model environment is typical of a hot summer afternoon. The simulated outflow starts as a layer of cold air, moving along the ground in from the left side of the box. The layer is coldest at the ground and is 2 kilometers thick. The laboratory results, now shown in green at the top, are compared with the numerical simulation, shown on the bottom. They show similar growth, evolution, and turbulent eddy structure. The pressure field, shown in the upper two windows, is compared to the temperature field, which is shown in blue in the lower two windows. Coincident with the turbulent eddies are regions of low pressure, shown in blue-green, which appear as oscillations in the pressure. A region of high pressure, shown in red, occurs in front of the cold air at the ground and is induced by the collision between the outflow air and the warm environment air. The internal flow structure is revealed by continually releasing colored tracer particles at the cold air source region. Upon reaching the front, the lower blue particles curve upward, in agreement with the Florida outflow photograph shown earlier. The middle and upper particles get caught in the turbulent eddies at the top of the cold layer. The nature of flow above the outflow is revealed by placing lines of tracer particles at various elevations in the model at the beginning of the 40-minute simulation. Only the air very near the top of the outflow is caught up in the turbulent eddies, and the flow above is smooth. The lifting of low-level air by the outflow, which is important for storm generation and intensification, is illustrated by pillars of tracer particles placed along the ground. The motion of the particles clearly shows strong turbulence and associated wind shear created by the eddies, which can pose a significant threat to low-flying aircraft.
Since its discovery as the cause of poliomyelitis, poliovirus has been the subject of intensive characterization. The structure of poliovirus has now been determined at near atomic resolution by X-ray crystallographic methods, giving a clear picture of the architecture of the virion and allowing several of the biological properties of the virus to be interpreted in the context of its three-dimensional structure. The first view of the virus shows the solvent-accessible surface of the particle. This picture is analogous to an electron micrograph, except that the resolution is higher, revealing that the particle has a great deal of surface relief. Here, we see a cross-section of the virus particle with a molecule of trypsin and an antibody molecule shown for size comparison. The poliovirus capsid consists of 60 copies each of 4 coat proteins, VP1, VP2, VP3, and VP4. Throughout this presentation, VP1 is shown in blue, VP2 in yellow, VP3 in red, and VP4 in green. VP4 is totally internal and is therefore not seen in this view. The particle has the symmetry of the regular solid, the icosahedron, which is shown here in white outline. Thus, the particle has 5-fold, 3-fold, and 2-fold axes of symmetry. The 5-fold axes are found at the 12 vertices of the icosahedron. In the virus, VP1 is located at the 5-fold axes of the particle. The 3-fold axes extend outward from the 20 triangular faces of the icosahedron. VP2 and VP3 alternate around the 3-fold axes of the virus particle. The 2-fold axes extend out of the center of each of the 30 edges of the icosahedron. The icosahedron and its axes of symmetry serve as convenient landmarks in describing the structure. Poliovirus assembles in infected cells. One of the early intermediates seen is a protomer consisting of 1 copy each of VP1 and VP3 and 1 copy of a precursor protein VP0 in which VP4 and VP2 are covalently linked. The protomers assemble to form pentamers which sediment at approximately 14S. 12 pentamers can further associate to form empty capsids. It is not clear whether the viral RNA is incorporated directly into empty capsid or is encapsulated by pentamers. The antigenic sites of the virus have been identified by characterizing mutants resistant to neutralization by monoclonal antibodies. We have grouped these mutations into 3 clusters. The first cluster of mutations is contained predominantly within a single loop connecting the top strands of the beta barrel of VP1. The sites cluster near the 5-fold axes of the particle. Site 1 dominates the neutralizing response to type 2 and type 3 poliovirus in mice. The second cluster of mutations includes residues from a large loop in VP1, a large loop in VP2, and residues at the carboxy terminus of VP2. These mutations cluster near the 2-fold axes of the virion. The third cluster of mutations includes residues from a loop near the carboxy terminus of VP1, from the small insertion top loop of VP3, and a residue from the top loop of VP2. These mutation sites cluster near the 3-fold axes of the virion. Sites 2 and 3, shown together here, dominate the neutralizing response to type 1 poliovirus in mice. When one considers all of the antigenic sites of poliovirus, it is apparent that they define ridges on the virus particle, and that these ridges outline deep valleys on the outer surface. These deep valleys, which are inaccessible to antibodies and therefore not subject to immune selection, are attractive candidates for the site responsible for the recognition by the cellular receptor for poliovirus. X-ray crystallographic studies of poliovirus have produced a detailed description of the architecture of the particle, showing a surprising similarity with several previously studied plant viruses and providing a 3-dimensional framework for interpreting several of the biological properties of the virus. Perhaps more important is the prospect that the structure will furnish a framework for both the design and interpretation of future experiments, including genetic manipulations of the virus. Such experiments will generate further insights into the relationship between virus structure and function, and in the long term may provide a basis for the rational design of improved vaccines and antiviral drugs for polio and related viruses.
This is an electron micrograph of a small spherical target used in inertial confinement fusion research at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. And here is a computer representation of a cutaway of the same target. The outer red shell is a hydrocarbon pusher, and then the orange is a glass sphere, and the blue represents the deuterium-tritium fuel mixture. The target is now being heated by laser radiation, and the outer layers are turning into a plasma and blowing off. The reaction to this rocketing off of the outer layers is to compress the target. The blue circles converging on the target represent the incoming laser radiation that's heating the outer layers of the target. And as it's being compressed, a shock wave is sent through the cold fuel, causing a lot of heat at the very center of the fuel, which makes the deuterium and tritium ignite. So now we're going to see a microscopic view of the deuterium and tritium nuclei, the red and blue spheres here. They are, in a plasma, they are positively charged ions. All the electrons have been stripped off the hydrogen, and so they repel each other when they collide. But if they hit just right with the right velocity and just dead on, then they'll combine to make a helium nucleus, which is the yellow sphere, and a rapidly moving neutron. The neutron is neutral and flies out of the target without interacting with the other particles, but the helium nucleus is positively charged and bounces around among the other particles, heating them up so that they move faster and faster, and therefore there are more and more reactions. And eventually this burn region at the very center will cause the rest of the fuel to ignite, and the whole target will explode, releasing a stream of neutrons. And the hope is to capture the energy in these neutrons and turn it into electricity. Here is a recapitulation of just the view of the target without the microscopic view. The time sequence of the laser pulse, in other words, how the energy changes as a function of time, has to be adjusted carefully so that the target is compressed without heating, because if the interior gets heated, it will resist the compression. So the laser pulse starts dim and then gradually gets brighter near the end of the compression, which takes place in a nanosecond or two. The radius of each shell as a function of time was computed by a simulation.
This is ARM, another robot movie, done in 1985. This animation simulates an idealized robot arm shown picking up a bolt from a conveyor belt and placing it into an assembly block. The sequence is the first piece of animation created using the Clockworks. The animation illustrates the Clockworks' ability to model and transform complex three-dimensional structures. The initial applications of the Clockworks have been in manufacturing and aerospace, but the Clockworks is a general-purpose visualization tool capable of simulating any structure which can be geometrically and mathematically modeled.
Hello, my name is Stuart Rogers, and I'm here at NASA's Ames Research Center. I'm going to be presenting a new piece of software that we've developed. The name of the program is called RIP, which stands for Remote Interactive Particle Tracer. This has been developed in conjunction with the Numerical Aerodynamic Simulation Project. This is an example of a distributed graphics process. We use two machines for this process. The first one is a Silicon Graphics Iris, part of which the monitor you can see right here. The other part is the Cray 2, which is Cray's newest machine. It has very large memory capability and is a very fast supercomputer. Now, why do we go to distributed graphics processing in computational fluid dynamics? Well, for two reasons primarily. The problems that we are dealing with are very large and require a very large amount of memory, even for the post-processing. And to do that, we go to the Cray 2 to be able to utilize as much memory as we can. And secondly, that a lot of the complex three-dimensional physics requires a fairly complicated post-processing, and therefore we're very time-intensive in computation, and therefore we need a very fast machine such as the Cray 2. RIP uses the workstation as the front-end machine, where all the local processing, such as the rotations and transformations of the graphical objects, is done. The user will take a geometry object and put it up on the screen, and with the use of a cursor, pick a point somewhere in the physical domain, and then that point information will be sent to the Cray 2. The Cray 2 will then compute the particle trace starting from that point. It will build a graphical object from that and then send it straight down to the workstation where it gets displayed. This happens nearly instantaneously, and the user doesn't realize that all this is going on. Then, once the trace appears, the user can manipulate it using transformations or rotations, or continue to pick more points and more starting locations for particle traces, and in a short amount of time build up an understanding of what the physical flow field is doing. I would like to demonstrate this with using a sample calculation of flow around a single post between two flat plates. This is similar to the geometry in the Space Shuttle main engine, where there are posts around which is flowing liquid oxygen. Looking on the screen, we can see a representation of this single post shown here, and a representation of the flat plate shown by the grid on the bottom. The flow will be going from left to right across the screen. I've located my cursor upstream of the post, down near the flat plate, and started to let particle traces go. I'm moving the cursor upstream slowly in the region of the horseshoe vortex and saddle point of separation. As you can see, I'm moving the cursor up and releasing particles at short distances and building up a quick picture of what's happening in this flow field, both upstream and downstream near the plate. Now, by rotating this, I can look at it from a different view, and for instance, here's the top view, seeing where the particle traces go near the plate. They're forming a horseshoe type shape known as a horseshoe vortex. Some of the particles are getting swept up into the wake region, forming a spiraling vortex. I will move the cursor over now and start to release particles to mirror this on the other side of the symmetry plane, and see that indeed the particles on the other side go up and form a second vortex in the wake. So now we have a pair of counter-rotating vortices. This is some flow calculated over an F-16-like aircraft, where the engine inlet has been fared over and the vertical tail has been taken off. These particle traces are being colored using pressure as a scalar function. The map up on the left-hand side shows the range of the pressure, and as we can see, the particle traces are being released here over the strake, and they form a strake vortex which wraps around and then as it comes over the wing, gets swept outboard, which is an effect of another vortex that's going up over the wing. And by moving it around, we can see exactly where this vortex lies and see that where this interacts over the surface of the wing, the pressure gets the lowest. It kind of gets a yellow and then red color, and that's the lowest pressure region over the wing where the highest lift is being created.
An example of a fairly complex model is this docking mechanism developed to pull together two satellites in orbit. The target and chaser satellite are maneuvered to within 1 meter of one another. The target satellite is equipped with a funnel that has a latching mechanism at its apex. The chaser has a telescoping boom that can be extended or retracted as desired. In order to prevent the two satellites from separating once they have docked, the boom on the chaser is shot into the conical receptacle of the target and funneled down to its apex, where the ball is then secured. The mathematical complexity of this model derives from the fact that the cone must be able to properly funnel the ball into the apex of the receptacle from any point of impact on the cone surface. This simulation takes advantage of the ability to model surface contacts in atoms. In this satellite docking maneuver using a clamping mechanism, it is assumed that the chaser satellite can be steered to within 15 centimeters in front of the target. When the handles of the chaser come to within 70 millimeters of the base of the claws, the locking levers on the claws are triggered to cause the handles to be pulled into the claws. As the two satellites approach, one of the handles on the chaser gets close enough to the claw to trigger the lever. The resultant motion causes the second triggered lever to bypass its handle, causing an improper docking. A design modification lengthening the handles is a solution to this problem, as shown in this sequence where a proper docking is achieved. This last example demonstrates a new and very powerful capability in atoms to model flexible components in a nonlinear large displacement environment. In this model, a 300-meter highly elastic dipole antenna has been strung through the shuttle. What the engineer wants to know here is how the tip and intervening segments of the antenna will behave when the shuttle's attitude thrusters are fired. The resultant wave pattern in the antenna can clearly be seen in this simulation. This was modeled using the atom's beam element. 10 beam elements were used per side, and the analysis was checked for correlation against results published by an AIAA paper. The correlation was excellent, and this model took only 4 hours to build. The engineering information, such as displacements, velocities, accelerations, and reaction forces that can be derived for any moving object using the ATOMS program, and the graphic animation of the model makes ATOMS ideally suited to aerospace applications. The new design capabilities, engineering insights, and savings in prototype costs associated with ATOMS make the program a worthy investment for the aerospace industry. ATOMS offers not only cost effectiveness for today, but creative possibilities for tomorrow. Possibilities that will lead to the new design application that carry the industry into the 21st century.